Our next speaker is Dr. John Fagan, who is the International Director for Food Safety, Purity, and Security of the Global Country of World Peace and Professor of Molecular Biology at Maharishi University of Management, also Executive Director of Earth Open Source, located in the US and in Europe. Dr. John Fagan.
It's a great honor to be here this morning to speak with all of you. All of our very esteemed guests from around the world. We really appreciate all of you joining us here for this feast of knowledge. We learned yesterday about swastika. It's health, and it's really defined in terms of establishment of the self. And Maharishi brought to the West this powerful tool of yoga, this powerful tool of transcendental meditation that enables the individual to establish themselves in health. And this, he expressed many times that the practice of transcendental meditation is the key element of maintaining and developing health. It's the key element of Ayurveda. And so we're going to today look at the molecular biology behind the transcendental meditation technique. At Maharishi University, we direct a research program in understanding the molecular biology of higher states of consciousness. The reason we even began to explore this is because of things that Maharishi had said over the years that indicated that this simple natural mental technique would influence this deepest level of the physiology. And this is just one of the things he said. He said, research, science is just the pursuit of knowledge. What is called science today is so small. He was putting us in our place as scientists at that point. And then he said, there is a level of knowledge where you can accomplish anything. And then he says, you can even erase the coding of a gene and create a gene of enlightenment. And other times he talked about how this simple mental technique can influence the level of the DNA. And in recent years, research at the university has actually shown that this is the case. And let me give you some, before we go into the research itself, let's give some background. In the area of molecular biology, remember it's a science, but it has a central dogma. They actually call it that, the central dogma of molecular biology. And that is that genes, these are the blueprints, express themselves as messenger RNAs, and then the messenger RNAs express themselves as proteins. And there was always this concept, for every single gene, there is one protein. But in fact, in recent years, that central dogma has been put aside because we've discovered that if you look at the human genome, that is, if you look at the DNA present in the physiology of each individual, and present in each cell of the physiology, what you discover is that human beings only have 21,000 genes. It was a huge shock when that was first discovered, because we knew there were more than 100,000 messenger RNAs in the physiology. And we knew there were hundreds of thousands of proteins. So how is it that you can get hundreds of thousands of proteins from just 21,000 different genes? This shook everything up. It shook up the whole field of molecular biology. And what we discovered, and now we're still only now looking to understand these mechanisms, and there's still a lot to learn. But it seems that there are ways for each of these genes to be reorganized, either at the messenger RNA level or at the protein level, where there are rearrangements that take place, or specific ways that these are translated, you might say, that allow many combinations and permutations that allow from this handful of genes, 21,000, all of the complexity of the physiology to emerge. It's really a spectacular thing that has come out. And during this time, we've also, since that central dogma was first expressed, we've discovered in the last 10 years many other interesting things. For instance, we thought that all hereditary changes, all inheritance of characteristics happened by changing the sequence of the building blocks, the letters of the genetic code. But we've discovered in the last 15 years that in fact there is a whole nother level of inheritance called epigenetics. And this is not a change at the level of the sequence of the building blocks of the genetic code, but appears to be inheritance at another level where the DNA is actually modified. It can be methylated, it can be modified in different ways, and this can actually be inherited. What this means is that your action, your experience, the impacts of the environment on your physiology can actually change your DNA in such a way that it's inherited to your children and your children's children. For instance, it's been shown very clearly and definitively now that if your diet is restricted, if your caloric intake, the intake of calories is restricted during your early years, it actually results in a situation where your children are less likely to be overweight, and your children are less likely to experience or come down with type 2 diabetes. This is not because of a change in the genetic code, but a change in the modifications of the DNA that happen after you're born. And this is carried out. Now, if that caloric restriction is not present in your son's life, then this influence becomes a little less. And the same the next time, so that these epigenetic changes can occur over time, but can be they can die out over a few generations. So anyway, we're shocked by these kinds of changes, that the DNA can change at these levels. And now what I'd like to do is to show you a little bit more of how gene expression works. There's a process called transcription by which the genes are transcribed into messenger RNAs. You can think of the genes as being a library in the nucleus of the cell, and the transcription process makes a Xerox copy of that gene, which is then carried to this cytoplasm where it is copied. Again, it is translated into a protein. And then proteins can either be structural, or many of them are enzymes that actually convert one compound into another. Here we represent this as compound X and compound Y. These are metabolites. So I've given you some vocabulary here: transcription, translation, metabolites. And here in the next slide, we see that in the last 15 years, new tools have been developed that allow us to study our genes and try to study this process of transcription much more powerfully, and study the proteins more powerfully and the metabolites more powerfully. We can look at the whole transcriptome, all of the messenger RNAs that are expressed in the body. all at once in one single experiment. We can do the same for all of the proteins that are expressed and all the metabolites. And this is what we've begun to do. This is like these new tools have created a new, you might say, a new frontier for understanding the deepest level of the physiology. And what we can say now is that using these tools, we can ask the question of what are all of the changes in the genes and the proteins and the metabolites that are expressed. What's happening on these levels when one practices meditation? And there has been one series of experiments done by one of the graduate students at Maharishi University, Wainagan, who has really looked at this in a very powerful way. And these are really the first studies of global gene expression in TM meditators. And this is a sort of a summary slide. We call this a heat map, that where he looked at all 21,000 genes, and out of those, what was discovered is that there are 18 of those genes that are specifically increased in expression in meditators. And there are 56 of those genes that are reduced in expression in meditators. And here you'll see there are, this slide, the top 6 lines of this, if you look in this direction, the top 6 lines are the record of those 76 genes for non-meditators. And the bottom 6 lines are the records for meditators, 6 meditators. And what you see is that the first 18 are red in meditators predominantly, blue in non-meditators predominantly. Those are the 18 genes that are increased in expression in meditators. And the next 56 lines, all right, all right. So here we go. All right, it's still pretty faint, but what you can see is that for these genes along here, the meditators have lower levels, blue. The non-meditators have higher levels, red. So a set of genes here that are turned on during in meditators, and here a set of genes that are turned off in meditators. And this is quite striking that you see such a clear difference between the meditators and the non-meditators. And this was the basic discovery, that these 74 genes are very clearly influenced by meditation. And this was comparing long-term meditators with age, sex, location. They were all from around the Fairfield area, diet. All of these things were matched. The only difference in these groups was that one group had been practicing meditation for a long time and the other had not. Here, we're looking at different networks. Where you see green is where genes were turned on. Where it's red, there are genes that are turned off. And there are several networks, and these are technical names for these networks that we see that are used. And you see in each one of them genes that are turned on or turned off. But the key thing is really summarized in this final slide. What we found is that the genes that are turned on or off are related to the stress response, they're related to inflammation, they're related to cardiovascular disease, and there are interestingly, some genes that are anti-tumor genes that are turned on with meditation. So this provides a molecular explanation for the fact that, in fact, what we find with meditation is reduced stress in the system, that the physiology responds more efficiently, more effectively to stressful situations and creates balance. Also, there's quite a lot of evidence from other levels that with meditation we have reduced inflammation in the system. And of course, Dr. Schneider has done a tremendous amount of work looking at the effects of TM on cardiovascular disease. And finally, these anti-tumor effects are quite interesting. So I wanted to end with one last slide here. I'm going to have to read it from up here. And Maharishi said, our destiny, he said, a time is coming. He was speaking to the Maharishi University graduates. He says that a time is coming that the graduates of MIU will be handling the administration of the world. I'm saying administration of the world from the reality of the DNA within everyone. Always in contact with the entire world, it will be maintained in complete liveliness by the graduates of MIU. With that ability to hold the constitution of the universe in their lively awareness, maintaining their DNA completely in the self-referral state. And he ends by explaining the significance of this. They will be creating such a peaceful, such prosperous, such fulfilling atmosphere in the world and life in the world, and that will be heaven on earth. So this sort of gives a perspective on what the potential is for not just the graduates of MIU, but all of us who are practicing yoga, practicing this technique of transcendental meditation, creating a situation where from the deepest level of our physiology, from the level of the DNA itself, we're creating this ability to create the kind of balance that will create heaven on earth. Thank you, and Jai Gurudev.